Welcome back to the Lessons for Tomorrow podcast, the motivational poster in your ear. I'm your host, Tim Ahlenius, VP of Strategic Initiatives at americaneagle.com. In this episode today, we are joined by a plethora of gentlemen who are going to be talking through a lot of fun topics, and this unofficial episode title is Ask Me Anything with Dries, the founder of Drupal and CTO of Acquia. This is going to be really talking about some key takeaways from DrupalCon, translating Drupal's vision to reality, what's next, and more. And as this is a follow-up to DrupalCon, which happened just a couple weeks ago, we wanted to sit down with Dries to talk more about all things Drupal, Acquia, and more. So Dries, welcome to the show. Very excited to have you here. I also have alongside me Peter from the americaneagle.com partners team and Jason, who is in charge of our Drupal practice here at American Eagle, and a great technical lead in mind. Just all of us joining you together, both from remote and in studio at americaneagle.com studios. So today, I wanted to give a little bit of time, just talk about Dries, right? Can't have a guest on the show without an introduction. And so we're very excited to have Dries, who is the original creator and project lead for the Drupal open source web publishing and collaboration platform. He also serves as president of the Drupal Association, a nonprofit organization formed to help Drupal flourish, and is also the co-founder and chief technology officer of Acquia, a venture-backed software company that offers products and services for Drupal. Alongside of all of that, he is also a co-founder of Molum, a web service that helps you identify content quality and more. Importantly, helps you stop website spam, a very important aspect in today's world. A native of Belgium, he holds a PhD in computer science and engineering from Ghent University and a licentiate computer science MSc from the University of Antwerp. In 2008, he was also elected Young Entrepreneurs of Tech by Business Week, as well as a Young Innovator Award. And in 2012, Ernst & Young gave him the Entrepreneur of the Year Award for New England. Wow. What a bio script for me to read. Dries, welcome to the show. If you just want to tell a little bit about just where you came from and kind of what inspired you for the creation of everything. And then we'll jump into some of our questions, but really want to let you introduce yourself and maybe a little bit about both Drupal, the association, and Acquia. You've got a lot of different backgrounds to bring to the table. And then we'll do some quick intros with Jason and Peter as well.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me, by the way. That's a big question, and I can go on for hours actually about that one question. But I actually started Drupal by accident, if you will, out of my dorm room in Belgium. I was studying computer science, and PHP and MySQL, two of the technologies that Drupal is built on, were kind of new technologies, and I figured I would spend a couple nights dabbling with these new technologies to learn them. And at our dorm, we also had a need for a message board. And so I'm like, maybe I should spend a couple nights, building a message board with PHP and MySQL. And that actually led to Drupal, believe it or not. So it was an internal message board. It evolved into sort of an experimental platform, eventually turned into a content management system. And so that was 21 or 22 years ago, a long time ago now. And so I've been working on Drupal ever since. And for the first 7 years of Drupal, it was a hobby project. It's what I would do at night or on the weekends, and eventually turned that passion into my full-time job. I'm skipping a lot of steps here in the history of Drupal and Acquia, but 7 years into Drupal, it was starting to take off. We would have conferences, several hundred people would show up. We saw large websites being built on Drupal. Like I remember MTV.com switched to Drupal and it crashed. And so I would spend my nights on the phone with engineers over at MTV trying to help them fix their Drupal site. And so it made me realize that in order for Drupal to be successful, it needed a company like Acquia to provide enterprise support and services to these larger Drupal users. And so it led me to co-found Acquia in 2007. So I've been doing Acquia for 15 or 16 years as well. And Acquia has grown to obviously it was born out of Drupal, but has grown from a CMS company to a DXP or digital experience platform company over the years. I'm sure we can talk about that more, but that's a little bit how all these things tie together, and then the Drupal Association is a nonprofit, and it's a nonprofit to help the Drupal project. And we provide like Drupal.org, our website. By the way, that website, Drupal.org, gets 2 million unique visitors a month, which is kind of an insane number. Yeah. But and so we needed an organization to run that website. We have a small engineering team, small but mighty engineering team to just kind of run the website. And then our conferences grew to, thousands of people attending. And so we needed an actual event management team, because putting on one DrupalCon takes a couple of $1 million. It's a lot of work to put on an event that size. And so, the success of Drupal led to the need for the Drupal Association to help support the project. And so that's how all these things kind of tie together a little bit, But the central theme of my career, I guess, has been around Drupal, content management, and, DXP systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And the growth of just where the web content management systems came from into the CMSs, into the DXPs now has been just an incredible evolution of the technologies, the additions of tools within to be a bit more of a one-stop shop in a sense, but then also needing, like you mentioned, the need for Acquia with regards to just that enterprise level support when it is so popular. It is handling sites with millions of visitors regularly from that whole performance aspect. And we all know how important that is today with the mobile device usage, right? And the fact that even with higher speed cellular services, the first impression of your brand is typically going to be within seconds of someone going to your website on a small screen, typically in transit somewhere. And right. So it's just incredible to see that growth of the features and functionality of Drupal itself, but then also the additional services that are there to support all organizations of all sizes.
That's right.
So with that background and everything, I want to give a little bit of background from Peter and then Jason as well. So if Peter, you want to kind of start and just kind of give a little bit about your role here at americaneagle.com and
Yeah, sure. So Peter Gavrilos, I have been with americaneagle.com now for probably around like 3.5 years. Since I've joined, I've always been a member of the partnerships team. I'm now one of our partner directors. In my role, kind of relating to this podcast and this conversation with Dries, is I manage the relationships with our partners who deal with Drupal, Acquia included. So I actually, had the pleasure of attending Acquia's sales and marketing kickoff. And I saw Dries speak remotely. I think you were still based in Belgium. And, I saw the talk. It was great. And then, a few weeks later, americaneagle.com decided that we were going to attend our first DrupalCon. So, was very excited to go. As an organization, we hadn't been before. I hadn't been myself personally. And I actually had the pleasure of meeting Dries at a dinner that was kind of co-hosted between Acquia and the Drupal Association. And, maybe I had a couple, glasses of wine, or I wasn't fully comprehending like who Dries was, but I got to meet him and speak with him, and it was a great casual conversation. I don't think it really clicked in my head who he was. Like, I complimented your hair. I was like, admiring the camera you had on your shoulder. I was like, Portland's a great place for photography. And it wasn't until after you walked away that a few people surrounding me were like, do you know who you were just talking to? And I was like, he said he was really knowledgeable about Drupal. Like, I assume, he probably knows what he's doing. And then it clicked in my head like, oh, this is the founder of Drupal, who I was just speaking with casually for probably 15, 20 minutes. So anyways, that's a little bit about my role. And, definitely here to kind of contribute and, provide my experience pertaining to how DrupalCon went this past year. And also, just learning more about you, Dries, and kind of the inception of Drupal and, what the goals are moving forward. So that's a little bit about myself. I'll pass it over to Jason now, who's another member of our team, and he can kind of give some background as well.
Yeah, good morning. And it's a privilege to be on this podcast with all you guys and Dries. It's funny because I was also doing PHP in my dorm, but my career had a totally different trajectory. It's not many people who can say like you that you've created a CMS that powers like 1% of the internet, or I don't know, something pretty high. So kudos on that. It's a major accomplishment what you've done. And so for me, I've been attending DrupalCon a couple of years now, and so it was nice to hear you at DrupalCon giving your keynote speech. But also it was really great to have you here on the show as well. And I look forward to talking with you. It's a privilege.
Yeah, thank you.
So Jason, you are heading up our more focused Drupal Acquia practice now, and we've been working with Drupal and Acquia in the past here and there. Here at americaneagle.com, we started with our own CMS back in the day, iDev, and that's continued to grow into an e-commerce platform as well called Raw Commerce. But over the years, we also started partnering with, and the lead up to Peter and the team he's on, the partnerships team, with all the different platform providers that started hitting the markets. And it was one of those where Drupal was always one that we would have different projects come through and we'd work with. And as we've grown over the years, we really found a sweet spot with it now that we're focusing even more on it, and hence the first DrupalCon experience and the relationships that we've been building. So we've been using it probably a little bit more behind the scenes, not at the forefront of some of the other platforms that we've been with, but at the same time, we've seen the growth and opportunity with it. So we're really doubling down and bringing Jason on and really focusing on the opportunity to build that relationship together and build incredible digital experiences through the tool and the platform itself. So we're very excited for all of that. As we look to jump into kind of the Ask Dries Anything, we do have a script, of course, of questions. We're not just going to just randomly ask a question. What is your favorite hair care product? But
you know what? I'm just going to jump in because I already asked. Like when I first met him, I was like, I could probably use something. And he told me, and Dries, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when you first started, you were using egg whites, right? Like way back in the day. And now you.
Oh, as a kid, yeah.
Okay.
There we go. I don't know if you know, but egg white, punkers that with the huge mohawks, they use egg whites because it just hardens.
Learn something new every day.
You got to try it out after this.
I just don't have enough hair anymore. So I mean, if you give me like egg whites that dye my hair in the front and the scalp that's receding every day. Thank you for my 4 children for that moment in my life. But overall, no, that's a great answer. So look at that. We did ask you anything. Sounds like Peter already asked that, though. So we have some other questions definitely that we want to work through and talk about. So, from just maybe a little bit more of the broader picture perspective, Peter, maybe you have a couple just about Acquia, the partnership that you want to go into. And then I know we have a couple others, Jason, a little bit more on the technical side, which we do go both into the marketing and technical side here. So don't worry if we go too deep. We'll eventually bring us back to the surface.
Yeah, I can kick us off. I think some of my first couple questions pertain to just Drupal in general, and then I do have 1 or 2 pertaining to Acquia specifically. And, Dries, I'm sure that you've run through this in previous conversations, but just so that viewers fully understand, like, this is a platform that was started in your dorm room. Did you envision it back then becoming what it is now? I know it was a hobby, but, when was the turning point? Like, what great logo did you guys get? Or when did you know, like, this is not a hobby. This could be something, incredible and probably my future career. So I would just,
It's funny.
Yeah.
Looking back, it's hard. Like in the moment, I felt like there's been many turning points. Like, for example, when I first open sourced the Drupal, as I mentioned, it was kind of my own personal site that I decided to open source. I expected 10 people to download it. So first of all, there wasn't a master plan in the early days, and that's why I called it sort of accidental. I was just having fun and sharing my work, expecting 10 people to contribute. And, more and more people started to contribute. Couple highlights maybe, or different moments I felt that there was a turning point. Like first was in the 2004 presidential election. I was in Belgium. I wasn't very familiar with U.S. politics, but Howard Dean was one of the candidates, as I'm sure many of you will remember and know better than I do. But he was special in the sense that he was the first presidential candidate to leverage the internet to campaign. And he built this campaign platform. It was called Dean Space, and it was actually built on top of Drupal. And so Dean Space, in a way, kind of revolutionized campaigning. And because it was built on top of Drupal, it got actually some press. Like, there would be articles in the, Wall Street Journal or, whatever, New York Times. And it would go like, yada, 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 Dean Space, comma, built on Drupal, right? So it was like subtle references to Drupal, but it actually led to, lots of great things happening. And, there was some investment that went into a company that would take that platform and make it more robust, because they said the next presidential election, every candidate is going to use a platform like this. And that happened to be true. Every presidential candidate in 2008 was using Drupal, to campaign online, which was pretty good. But to me, definitely that felt like, wow, that's kind of a big deal. All of a sudden Drupal is making it into some of that, has that visibility in the media. I would say another turning point actually goes back to the first DrupalCon. I was organized in Antwerp, where I was living in 2005, and we found this little venue, and we expected like maybe 30 people to show up. And like I think 40 or 50 people showed up, and it was a huge scramble because we had to find another meeting room and we couldn't find one. And I just couldn't believe at the time that there was like 40 people that would be willing to travel to Belgium to talk about Drupal for a week. I mean, that was just the most crazy thing in my mind, because I was working on Drupal at night and on the weekends, and actually would never talk about Drupal to anyone, and all of a sudden we have all these people that want to talk about Drupal. And that for me was unreal. And it felt like a turning point at the time. Now, looking back, that was like, not much, right? Like,
yeah, I was going to say, like, fast forward to present day, and now you have several thousand people that attend on average.
Yeah, it's been crazy. 2008, whitehouse.gov switched to Drupal, which was a big deal, and definitely a turning point, because as you can imagine, a website like whitehouse.gov needs to scale, right? And President Obama would do these live State of the Unions, and millions of people would be on the website at the same time. And also every script kiddie in the world tries to hack whitehouse.gov, other nations, and hacking groups. Like, I mean, it's a constant target for security, threats, let's say. And that was a big turning point for Drupal too, because it gave a lot of credibility. Like, people are like, wow, it actually scales. It's secure. Like in the whole term of President Obama, there wasn't any security issues. No problems. And so huge testament to Drupal, and really gave a lot of confidence to other organizations to go with Drupal. To me, that felt like a big deal, and it was, obviously. And so anyway, there's every time we got bigger and bigger, I felt like, wow, it can get bigger than this, And then it did. And so I feel like there's many turning points, and MTV being one of them too. I referenced MTV. Yeah. Wow, MTV is using my hobby project. That's crazy. And of course now, I think almost every artist website runs on Drupal. There's thousands of artist websites and that's because Warner Music and Sony Music, all of these brands use Drupal for their artists. So, it's come a long way, but I continue to be amazed about what people do with Drupal and how it keeps growing and getting bigger.
So, my next question, kind of actually to piggyback off of that, because, you mentioned a lot about scale and growth. What advice would you give in terms of trying to scale up a technology or an organization? Because, in my head, Drupal was started in a dorm room and somehow it made its way to what it is today. Like, what advice would you give to someone who, is, in their basement, in their room, trying to, create a hobby, and then eventually it gets bigger than what they expected?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there is no overnight success, right? Sometimes people think like, wow, how did Drupal get so big? And well, guess what? I spent 21, 22 years of my life working on it. So it takes time to build a project or a piece of software and get it adopted. And the second piece of advice would be, like, I actually went through a big evolution, like from being a student, computer science student, like I would, build Drupal for myself. That evolved to building Drupal as a developer for other developers. And all of a sudden I'm managing a project. I'm helping to organize conferences. I have to figure out nonprofits to help get a checking account. We have to scale the infrastructure. I had to learn how to fundraise for that. To starting Acquia, and Acquia has been a rocket ship. To be honest, we raised $186 million to hire, many people. We're about 1,500 or so employees. I think we're over that now. And so my journey has been an interesting one where I had to constantly evolve my skills. And I would say my advice would be, we wouldn't have been here if I was sort of stuck being a developer. You know what I mean? I had to reinvent myself, learn marketing, sales, fundraising, managing teams, managing people that manage people. So I had to kind of go on a journey, and not everybody wants that, and that's okay too. But I think if you start a project in your dorm, and if it's going to be widely successful, you need to figure out a lot of these things, Either you do that yourself or you find people to help you do all of these things. But it's not sufficient to just write software. You're going to manage people and communities and budgets and money, do marketing, hire people, that kind of stuff.
Got it. On that note, again, speaking of hiring people, while I was at Acquia's SMKO, I realized that you guys have added a ton of new and great talent to your team over this past year. And, I was present, but a lot of our viewers were not. So I would love if you could just share, the upcoming goals in 2022, 2023 for Acquia. You have this great sizable team now. What are you striving towards?
Yeah, the history of Acquia, maybe it's useful if I talk very briefly about the history, because I think it helps you understand sort of our future, right? So as I mentioned, we were born out of Drupal, and the original vision was to be to Drupal what Red Hat was to Linux, which essentially means providing commercial support, right? That was the original business model for many open source companies at the time. Very quickly, we kind of changed gears, if you will, or we added on top of that, because Amazon had just launched AWS when, just after we started the company, and we kind of bet the whole farm on building a PaaS, a platform as a service for Drupal, which really helped us grow tremendously fast. And so we helped pioneer a business model to deliver open source in the cloud, back in 2008. And very successfully. And then I would say 5 years ago or something, maybe 6 years even, we decided to expand beyond just content management and content management in the cloud to DXP, or digital experience platforms. And the vision, I think, is pretty simple, is ask yourself the question, if you are going to be a digital business, if you want to be a winner in the digital world, what do you need, right? And obviously, organizations need a website, but they also need a lot of other things. They need email marketing. Typically, email is a very important channel. They have to usually invest in data, understanding their users and visitors so they can deliver personalized experiences. And so that leads to things like personalization products, but also CDPs, customer data platforms. And so in the last 5 years, Acquia has evolved beyond, content management in the cloud to having a portfolio of products. And we have built some of those ourselves, and then we have acquired others. And today we have our Drupal cloud, which is that original business, and that's doing well and growing. And we have a marketing cloud, which different tools and products for marketers, and that includes things like email marketing, personalization, CDP, some of it, and some other things. We bought a DAM, a digital asset management company. We have a PIM, a product information management solution. Again, all the tools that digital organizations need to be successful in 2022. And so if you ask me what's the vision for Acquia, it's continuing to expand our leadership in DXP. And in a short 5 or 6 years, we've evolved from being kind of a small player or not even a player to being a leader. Today, I think if you were to look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant, I think we're the clear number 2 in DXP behind Adobe. Like we're in the top 2 or top 3, depending on how you look at it. So we've done well in the last 5 years, very fast. I think we've grown to become a leader, and we want to extend that leadership. So we will continue to invest in all of these things that I mentioned, but we're also remain fairly acquisitive. We want to acquire companies that complete our portfolio of solutions. At the same time, we're investing heavily in things like headless and decoupled architectures, stuff like that, which is less about products and more about, architectures, as I mentioned, a new way of doing things. So that's kind of where at the high level where we're focused. I don't know, Peter, if that answers your question. But
No. I think that's a great response, and it's just so interesting to see like the growth take place in real time. So I just wanted to know, what are the next steps? So yeah, no, that was a great response.
Dries, I just want to thank you for that vision of everything with just going through all the acronyms as well, right? I've been in that space with the evolution of everything, but I think the biggest one I just want to ask a little bit more of insight from you on is regarding the CDPs. And I have seen that be a focus of a lot of organizations as something that they need to be exploring or going into. But I've also had the challenge of having to explain to them the true opportunity that a CDP provides compared to all the other databases that exist with the digital MarTech stack that they have with all that information. So from your perspective and how Acquia is moving forward with the CDP and more that marketing arm of everything that is happening, and also part of the technical arm with the architecture side, how do you see all of these starting to blend together in the right way to what I would call bring data into a state of harmony versus a silo of individual data, storage areas? How's that really in Acquia's vision? How's that coming to fruition with all these acquisitions, with all the kind of different ways that data is stored and used in today's digital experience build out, being focused on?
Yeah. Well, let me step back for a second and then answer your question because, well, first of all, what is it that you want to do, right? You want to deliver great experiences to your visitors, your customers. And what does it mean to be a great experience? It means it's a relevant experience. It's real time. You understand your visitor. It's like going to your local pub, and the moment you walk in, they say, "Hey, Jason, you want the regular?" That's a great little experience, right? And so how do we transfer that notion that we often experience in kind of the real world? How do we replicate that in a digital world? So that's the goal, right? And to do that, you need 2 things. One is great content, and 2 is really understanding your users. And so great content, you manage that in a CMS or a DAM. Understanding of your users, that's really what a CDP is all about. So I just wanted to maybe explain that. I know you guys know, but it might be useful.
Definitely.
But and so the problem is this. Organizations have a lot of silos today. And you can probably see it in your organization if you're listening. Like there's usually a web team responsible for the website. There's an email marketing team. It's completely different from the web team. There is an e-commerce team with merchants, often completely different from the email marketing team. And you have all of these organizational silos. And it's driven by the fact that you have all of these different tools and that these tools don't integrate well. And so what happens is you have a lot of data silos, and a great example would be this, and I actually experienced this a while ago, where I was born in Belgium, as I mentioned, so my native language is Dutch, my second language is French, and actually my third language is English, right? So when I go to a website and it offers me different choices, I may set it to Dutch because that's my main language. And so I did that on a website, and literally the next day, I would get an email in English, and it's because whatever they use, Marketo, wasn't integrated with their website, whatever they use for their website, I don't know. And it's a great example of how organizations miss the mark in delivering great experiences. It's a small example, but I can give you dozens of those. And for me, it's okay because I actually do speak English, but if it was my grandparents, they actually don't speak English very well. And so now you missed out, right? Because if you send them an email in a language that they have a hard time reading. Anyway, you get the point. And the problem is all of these data silos and the lack of integration between the different systems. So what the CDP does is twofold. One, it integrates all of the data sources across the organization. So it will hook into your CMS, it will hook into your email marketing, it will hook into your CRM, it will hook into everything. And actually, on average, our customers, we see they have like 15 different integration points, including bespoke databases, all the things in the organization. So that's really step one, is like hook into all the data sources, legacy sources, new sources, whatever it is. And from there, build a unified customer profile. So you have one definition of who's Jason, who's Peter, everything about them in one place. And then you can use that data. And by the way, unifying those data sources is hard, because there is a lot of incorrect data, outdated data. We have to do like machine learning based fuzzy matching and all of the kind of stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on there. I can talk more about that. But once you have that user profile and it's a clean, reliable user profile, now you can use that to drive a lot of your activities. You can use it to personalize content on your website. You can use it to personalize email campaigns. You can use it to, customize mobile experiences. You can push it back into your service centers too, your customer support teams, et cetera, And so that's kind of the second part, is like, how do you use that profile to activate? How do you activate that data, and how do you use it to personalize experiences? And so usually a CDP and definitely Acquia, we're investing heavily in machine learning based technologies there to kind of try and automate, because once you have all of that data, it's a lot of data, and it's hard to kind of manually deal with that. So you have to rely on machine learning based automation to make sense of it. But we can do things like, we can learn, for example, that Peter is really good at reading email in the morning, but Jason is more of an evening emailer. And so like the machine learning algorithms like start to use all of that information to optimize the experience. That's just one example. So that's what a CDP does, and it has actually tremendous results for our customers. They usually means they can send less emails to customers, and every email is more relevant. So they bring down their cost, but increase their conversion rates, which is obviously very beneficial. And so that's what a CDP does. And I think it's kind of a new era still. I don't know. It's been around for a while, but at the same time, it's kind of new, and I think a lot of organizations are CDP curious, if that's a word. Yep. Trying to figure it out. But we see a lot of opportunity in the CDP world, and to me, it comes back to what I said in the beginning. Like the two fundamental building blocks are content and data, and CDP is basically the data store, And so I think it's going to be as important as your content store.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Dries, I appreciate that you took it back a step at the beginning and talked about that digital experience, because that is what it's all about. And that's what you need to have the data provide for your end users, is that personalized experience. And no matter what the channel, right? So the website is one channel that you can deliver that through, emails another, socials another. I mean, that machine learning, that capability to process and identify the correct opportunities to deliver at the right time, at the right moment, on the right device even, is so important for truly building that relationship from an organization to their end users or customers overall. So I really appreciate you kind of walking us through that. I know, Jason, you've been very quiet, and I know you've got a good list of questions as well that you would love to ask Dries. So I'm going to turn it over to you here, and maybe we'll get a technical hat on here for a little while and dig a little deeper.
Yeah, thank you for that. And if I may step back for a second, I should have properly introduced myself earlier. As you asked, Tim, my role with americaneagle.com is as Drupal Technical Director. Of course, I'm a big fan of Drupal, so I'd love to talk about that. But if I may, since we were talking about digital experience platforms, I did have a question about that. And actually, before this talk today, I asked a lot of Drupal people, DrupalCon and elsewhere, like if you had the chance to talk to Dries, what would you ask him? So I took some of these questions and compiled them. For what I hear a lot of people asking is, what is a DXP? I know you just went through and explained that. And I'm a fan, so just to be clear. But as if I may, bring up what some of the critics are saying, as you've probably heard, of course, Real Story Group, for example, on the CMS Wire website that they have, they said in April 2022, quote, "We believe the phrase was originated by failing portal platform vendors looking for a fresher label, and then adopted by web content management vendors looking to acquire their way to growth," end quote. Their argument essentially is most customers don't actually know what a DXP is. And the reality is that it's not a single offering, but a variety of tooling cobbled together. And customers want a best of breed tools from multiple vendors. So I guess what people are wondering is this sort of marketing fluff. And also on that, if I may tack on another question, I think you recently said yourself that you thought digital experience is kind of vague, and you preferred site builders. Ambitious site builders is the target audience for Drupal, I know, but I think you said recently that it humanizes who your target audience is. Digital experience could apply to almost anything these days, right? Whether it's television streaming content or something like that. It could be far more than web or mobile. So is it clear what digital experience platforms are to the majority of people out there? Do you think that is a thing according to Real Story Group that they don't think it is? So I'm just wondering what your take.
I mean, it is a marketing term, to describe a collection of different tools, right? And the tools in one DXP aren't necessarily the same tools as in another DXP. I would say they're probably 80% the same. So I think there's a directional definition of what a DXP is. And if you talk to the analysts like Gartner and Forrester, they have their own definitions as well. So I think we're slowly converging on a definition, but I'm not sure it really matters that there is a definition. I would say people tend to adopt each of the tools sort of one step at a time, right? Like if you're looking for building a new website, you're not necessarily buying a DXP. You're looking for a CMS and not for an email marketing solution. So in a way, it's more like an ecosystem. And what you have to think about is like, what ecosystem do you want to, invest in? And maybe a very simple analogy, Jason, could be Apple, right? Like it's not likely that you're going to buy a MacBook, an iPhone, and an iPad all at the same time. I mean, it may happen. It's just like with a DXP, right? It may happen. And we definitely see customers that buy a whole suite of everything, Acquia DXP. But more likely than not, you buy the iPhone. And then a year later, you're like, I need a tablet, right? And then when it comes time to buy the tablet, you're most likely going to buy an Apple tablet because it's going to play nice with your iPhone. or a MacBook because it's going to integrate well, all the way from iMessage to iCloud to everything in between. And it's a little bit like that. So I think of a CDP as like it's an ecosystem of tools. You kind of decide, what do you want to be part of, but then you adopt the different things in there one at a time. And so, like for example, in Acquia's case, you want to think about, if you care about open and open source and all of these things, it makes sense to buy into the Acquia CDP world. And if you care about, other things, Adobe's might be a better fit, or Optimizely's. Like each of us have our own nuances, if you will.
Yeah, and Dries, you bring up a good point there too on the DXP side, right? Just because the tool's there doesn't mean you're having to use that tool, but it is a great starting point. And what we've done, and with a lot of the clients I've worked with, we'll start, and even before it was called DXP, I agree, it's a marketing label, and I'm all about marketing buzzwords and labels. I use them every day, all the time. But it is really about the fact that, CMSs were adding personalization capabilities prior to being called DXPs. And a lot of them were adding the tools to add them and build that suite. But there's also some third-party tools that might be better suited for your organization, what you need to do. So as long as the two can integrate well together to communicate for that messaging, your business is best to find the right path forward with the tools that you need to deliver that correct experience within the customer's journey. And I think alongside of that, the big focus is really going to be, you may want to start with what's in your DXP because it's there, and learn as you mature in what you're delivering in that digital experience. If that solution is delivering exactly what you need, great, stick with it. If you find a point where you do need to pivot, that's usually where most of them have a great opportunity to integrate to the next maturity level of tool that you move into. So why go and start with, I always use the car analogy, right? Why go and start with the Ferrari when the Ford Taurus is going to be good enough? And then, maybe you grow and you don't have to jump that far either, but when you grow out of that, you kind of move up to the Cadillac or whatever that next one may be. And so to me, that really gives you that growth as an organization with your tech stack. And I feel that the DXPs provided that.
We pride ourselves in that because we call ourselves the open DXP. Open is kind of what sets us apart. And that actually goes back all the way to our roots, at open source. Like we want each of our products to be, we call it a landing zone or starting point. Like you can start with any of our products. It doesn't really matter. But then we want to build them in an open way so you can integrate other products into it, right? And that comes from our open source roots. Like, I don't know if you know, but Drupal itself has about 40,000 modules or integrations, so our whole philosophy has always been, we will fit into your stack. Like we're not trying to shove our entire suite sort of down your throat, like maybe some of our competitors are more keen to do, right? Like we literally take the opposite approach of that. It's like, we want to be an open platform and we will integrate and we will interoperate as well. And that way you can start small, grow into something bigger. You can start with a simple website that has 0 integrations. Great. You can start adding integrations one at a time. You don't have to do personalization on day one. You can do that a couple of years into your project too. That's fine. But we have the value though of going with, picking a DXP is like, as I said, you pick an ecosystem, right? You're going to get certain integrations that are probably better. If you go with Adobe's DXP, you're going to get a lot of the Adobe integrations. If you go with Acquia's, you're going to have a lot of our integrations and a lot of kind of third-party integrations.
So that's a good segue into the next topic I wanted to ask you about, which is the ecosystems of open source in general, right? As you are aware, of course, and you've talked about this, it's evolved over the years. And you've talked in other podcasts, I believe, about how, the economic system behind Drupal, that can stand to use some improvement. Of course, open source modules require funding. Even if it's free, somebody has to pay for the work, whether it's the developers or a company doing that. And you've also noted in a recent talk that since COVID, contributions have been on the decline. That may be temporary, of course. As you know, of course, issues are stuck in the queue a long time. Open source itself can lead to a lack of diversity because you have to have the time to do pro bono work, right? So you've made appeals to organizations to get involved and help fund contributions. Acquia itself, of course, has an acceleration team that does that. Of course, it helps if people have some corporate sponsors to help with that work. But outside of Drupal agencies, there is a sort of a lack of diversity in the sense that it's mainly organizations that are already in the business of furthering the common good, such as universities, governments, and associations. So I'm wondering, in terms of, the open source model, what your thoughts are if there is a need for, perhaps a more hybrid model, in the sense that, in other platforms, they have paid modules, or some other ways to monetize the open source platform. Right now, that doesn't happen in Drupal or on Drupal.org. Do you see in the future that that could be part of the ecosystem? Maybe not on Drupal.org, but is there a chance that Drupal may follow the lead of other content management systems out there that are doing that?
Right. Well, a couple of things, because there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, I would say that we are in a pretty healthy position. Like every year, we have about 10,000 individual people contribute to Drupal, and 1,200 or so organizations contribute to Drupal. So we actually have a very diverse contributor base. And to put that in perspective, Acquia is the largest contributor to Drupal. We have a dedicated team of, I think, about 30 people. That's all they do is write open source code. And Acquia represents like 3% of all of the code contribution going into Drupal. So yes, I'm not saying everything is perfect, but I think it's actually more reliable and healthier than a lot of proprietary competitors that depend on a single organization writing all of the code. Like there's a robustness to the distributed model that we have. Over time, that has evolved from me being the sole contributor to having all these people today, and 2/3 of the contributors are actually paid by organizations to contribute, not necessarily full-time, right? But only 1/3 of the people are sort of hobbyist contributors, if you want, that contribute in their own spare time. And that's probably a healthy mix. And we're constantly trying to push more organizations to sponsor contribution, because just healthier for the individual contributors if they can get paid to do work. Plus it improves, as you said, like gender diversity, for example, because sadly women are often to do more domestic tasks than men still, and it makes it more difficult for them to have spare time and use spare time to contribute. So we see that when people get paid to contribute, there's more female contributors, as an example. So there are definitely challenges with volunteer or hobbyist contribution that we're trying to address. So anyway, so your kind of second point, I guess, is like, how do we get more paid contributors, and how can we explore different business models to sustain and scale open source? I mean, that is a very big topic, Jason, and there are models today, like and so we have to talk sort of legally and architecturally a little bit to discuss these. But like, because of the license that Drupal has, any PHP code has to be GPL. All right, so therefore, any PHP code has to be open source under the terms of the GPL, because the license at a high level basically is you can use Drupal, for free, But if you make changes to it, you also have to make them available for free. You have to give the same rights to others than have been given to you. Is the basic principle. And so that means that PHP code has to be open source. So the way to monetize things, or one way to monetize, is to use kind of a client-server architecture, where the integration code can be a PHP module, but it's calling some sort of cloud service that does things, and that cloud service can be, a commercial offering, right? And that's how a lot of these integrations work today. For example, if you have a MailChimp integration, just to name one, the module is free, but you have to pay MailChimp to get the service, right? And I can give you 1,000 examples like that. With search, email, you name it. Like all of the integrations often work that way. And often that is a way to do it. I know other open source projects, they allow sort of proprietary plugins written in PHP. But my belief is that that is actually a violation of the license. They're not actually allowed to do that. Or you could do it, but anyone that buys a license can distribute it for free. Anyway, so it gets into in the details a little bit, but I think the point I wanted to make is I'm all for paid contribution. I'm all for building business models and economic systems around open source, because I actually believe it's how we'll grow open source. If we can have more paid contributors, we're going to grow faster. It's healthy. Sometimes it's a little bit controversial to say in open source, especially sort of those that have fundamental beliefs about free software versus open source. I'm not that. I'm more pragmatic. I believe in, building, businesses and sustainable organizations, and paying people for their work and all of these things.
Right. That's a very good answer. Thank you. Appreciate it. I do also want to ask you about Drupal's, future, like in DrupalCon at the last presentation you gave, you talked a lot about the goals and initiatives, the new initiatives like focusing on site builders and module contributors. I think you, in fact, just said it a little while ago. The goal is for Drupal to get back to its roots. And also, I think you said before, we're trying to shake that mindset of for developers by developers to make the system more user-friendly for the people who are using it. Drupal 8 was a bit of a departure in the sense that, well, it was a strategic decision to move to Symfony and rewrite the platform. And then, of course, there was a little bit of a drop off in users because of that. Would you describe, it seems like a course correction going forward to get those users back, or would you say it's the Drupal is going to double down perhaps on being an enterprise level system? What would you say about those?
The strategy, yeah. I think Drupal, I'm not sure it's a course correction necessarily, but well, you have to remember, like from the day I started Drupal to today, the market has changed, right? The world has changed, and so has Drupal with it. Well, like as an example, 15 years ago, and somebody came to me and they said, hey, I want to build a website for my daughter's soccer club. I would say, yeah, you should use Drupal, because that was one of the few tools available at the time. Today, of course, I probably wouldn't recommend Drupal. In fact, I would not recommend Drupal, because you can go to the SaaS solutions. You can, go use Wix or Squarespace, unless you really care about using an open source solution, then yes, use Drupal, because Drupal does scale down, but it will be more work, to set it up and maintain compared to these SaaS solutions. At the same time, the enterprise, the high end of the market has evolved, to DXP platforms. And so that's a big change. And as a result, Drupal had to evolve and find its unique place in the market. And I think the unique place in the market is actually in between developer centric solutions and sort of SaaS-based solutions, right? Like the reason people fall in love with Drupal is that they can use our low-code tools or no-code tools to quickly drag and drop and assemble a website using these 40,000 modules that we have, and then click it together. And then when they need to, because we're open source, they can just do whatever they want. They can make any kind of customization because they're open source. There's no limitations as what they can do. But they have a great starting point with our low-code, no-code tools, right? And so that sits perfectly in the middle of a spectrum, where on the one hand of the spectrum, you have developer frameworks. Developer frameworks like Symfony, Laravel, there's a million of those. Not a million successful ones, but there's a lot of frameworks, as you know, and those are great for developers, but guess what? They have like 0 UIs typically, right? Like you can't do any dragging and dropping. You can't do any WYSIWYG site building or page building. And so that's not what Drupal is, right? On the other end of the spectrum, the SaaS tools, while they're very accessible for everyone, they don't usually let you customize much. And maybe there's a little bit of customization, but like doesn't have that kind of unlimited freedom that Drupal has. And so when I talk about ambitious site builders, I think it's that in between, where people can do a lot through a UI and they can have it hosted and managed like SaaS. But when they need to, they can break out of that box, and they can customize whatever it is that they want because Drupal is open source. And to me, that's what Drupal is all about, and that's what Drupal has always been about. And when I talk about ambitious, we say Drupal is for ambitious digital experiences. That's it, like people can build anything they want. And when I said in the last DrupalCon Dries note, Drupal is for ambitious site builders. It's not a departure. At least in my, and maybe I should have explained that better. I don't know, but like to me, we're still about ambitious digital experiences. But the way we're going to build these digital experiences is by doubling down on that ambitious site builder, and that persona that wants to do a lot through a UI, but that can also kind of crack open the code. It doesn't have to be one person; it could be an organization, where marketing can do most of it, but they need some help from maybe engineering, to uniquely customize their experience. That I think is what Drupal is really good at, and I think that's different from where we started. As I mentioned, we started as a tool by developers for developers, and I think just all of the changes in the market, I think, has kind of changed where we sit and where we play. And it means that we're churning some of these low-end sites, to be honest, because they're better off being managed on a Squarespace or a Wix or a Weebly or a WordPress.com, right? Which is kind of simple low-end sites typically. That's not where we play necessarily, or not. That's not like where we have the unique advantage. There's a lot of small sites built with Drupal, but where we have the unique advantage is in like that sweet spot that I described.
As you brought up market share, this is my last question. As you know, 50% of all Drupal websites are still on Drupal 7.
Right.
Of course, Drupal 8 was a rewrite. So going from 7 to 8 was a big lift. Of course, once you get on that bandwagon, it's much easier to go from 8 to 9 and 9 to 10 and so forth. But I know, and you already alluded to this, Drupal.org has what did you say, 2 million visits a month. So Drupal.org, of course, is still on Drupal 7. There's a lot of websites out there that are really massive that may be struggling to get onto the latest versions. There's also, I think, small businesses that just don't have the budget to do a rewrite if they just did it a few years ago. What do you see as, whether it's the Drupal Association or Acquia, do you see any potential efforts? Actually, I think you have, Acquia has a tool for that specifically, right? But do you see any particular efforts to get all these websites from Drupal 7 upgraded?
Yeah, we're investing in that. I can talk to that a little bit. As you said, like about half of all the Drupal sites are on 7, and we're currently in market is Drupal 9. Now, the important thing to realize is that we still maintain Drupal 7, and so for many people, it's just reliable, battle tested. They get bug fix releases, security releases. It's not like it's an abandoned release, so to speak, that doesn't get any care, right? Like we still care, and it's still supported, and we just extended support by another 2 years earlier this year with the clear statement that we may extend it again. So like when I talk to a lot of organizations that they don't see the need to migrate, they're happy. But then there's others that do want to migrate because obviously there is a lot of new innovation in Drupal 8 and 9 and Drupal 10, which is about to be released at the end of this year. But the migration path has been hard because it was a rewrite. And so, we build a lot of tools to try and automate a lot of the migration. The community built a lot of tools to try and automate a lot of the migration. And on top of that, Acquia built more tools to try and automate even more of the migration. But the fact remains that, it's probably like 70% automated. And there is a last 30%, which usually involves custom code that people built, right? Like could be custom integrations with, some sort of backend system that they have, or it could be anything really. And so that requires an investment of time or money to migrate to the latest version of Drupal as well. And that's been holding back, a lot of these organizations to make the step. So we're trying to, like for example, at Acquia, we have a tool, it's called AMA. It stands for Acquia Migrate Assistant. And it's specifically, we worked on it, we're still working on it for over a year with a team of engineers to try and sort of auto-magically migrate these sites from 7 to 8, for 7 to 9 now, and to give them all the tools that they need, like testing environments, and like we can, spin up all of these environments to make it as easy as possible. And we see a lot of organizations migrate right now, but it's gonna take a while because there's so many. I think it's 600,000 Drupal 7 sites that need to be migrated. And it's actually been good business for a lot of the agencies too, sadly, or, luckily, I don't know what to call it, but like a lot of Drupal companies are very busy doing these migrations.
And when 10 comes out, and you said potentially December, will that be a good time for agencies to recommend people start migrating to Drupal 10, or is it better to wait for that ecosystem of contrib modules to also get into Drupal 10 compatibility? Like, what would you say, for going forward, as a recommendation? What's the phrase? Skin your knee, be the first person to do that, or other people?
Yeah. Let me answer that in two parts, because one thing I want to be very clear about is like starting with Drupal 8, we completely changed our release model. And we basically said we're no longer going to break backwards compatibility like we did from 7 to 8, and which is why so many sites are still on 7. So we changed that completely. And now if you're on 8, the upgrade to 9 is easy. If you're on 9, the upgrade to 10 will be easy. Like we won't break things anymore, which is a big change from how we used to work. And it's, by the way, part of this evolution of being for developer, by developers for developers to, being more like a regular software project. Anyway, so that's important to know. And that's important to know because it helps me answer your question, which is, so when we release Drupal 10, like 95% of all of the modules will just work with Drupal 10. Some of them, you may have to make some changes to your code. But these changes have been long announced, and we manage them through a deprecation process. And most of the time, these changes can be made programmatically with some tools. We have tools that does convert code from Drupal 9 to Drupal 10. Sometimes some manual effort is required. Usually it's very easy because it's well managed. So you should know that too. And so the way it then works, Jason, is when Drupal 10 is released, you have to check which of my modules that I'm using because people use sometimes 100 contributed modules or something. They can check, are these modules ready for Drupal 10 or not? And we have tools for that. Like you can install a module and it will tell you, it will show you all your modules and it will do like check, cross. That one is not ready. And so it will tell you when you can hit the upgrade button, so to speak. And when you can't, you can either help upgrade the module or you can wait a little bit longer, and that's fine too. Because we'll support Drupal 9 for, like another year or something. And so it gives the whole ecosystem time to upgrade. So some organizations love being the first, and others, they're like, I'm a little bit more conservative. I'm going to wait.
Well, thank you, Dries. It's been a privilege. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, Dries, wow. We used more than the time that we originally allotted, and we could talk to you all day long, I'm sure. But we do have to come to a close for our listeners whose commutes are probably over, their workouts are done, and they're still kind of wondering, well, if I don't look at my phone or my watch, how much time is really left in this show? But very, very engaging conversation, lots of great in-depth information, both on the Drupal side, the Acquia, the industry, honestly. And we truly appreciate the opportunity for Peter and Jason and I to just, have this episode with you to really give us your insights and vision and just your years of experience. Honestly, we thank you for the time on the show today. Overall, I just want to thank all of our listeners for tuning into the future by listening to the Lessons for Tomorrow podcast. For more information about the topics discussed today, check out the description of this episode. And if you want us to cover a specific topic or submit feedback, please email us at lessonsfortomorrow@americaneagle.com and let us know. Be sure to follow this podcast wherever you listen to them, or video feeds on YouTube as well, where we also post, to stay up to date with us. While you're at it, if you wouldn't mind giving us a rating, as long as it's positive or the real truth, that's fine. And share this podcast with others to prepare them for the future. And also, don't forget to follow us on social media, where you'll find me posting through that auto-magical element of machine learning that Dries mentioned earlier. This episode is brought to you by americaneagle.com Studios. If you're interested in other podcasts brought to you by americaneagle.com Studios, please check out the link in the description. I'm your host, Tim Ahlenius, and I'll catch you in the next lesson.